We're going to start from Mem Daled Amud Sheni by the bottom. I just want to point out to you, so as a way of introduction, you would never think about it this way, but if you would suppose take a hamburger from a McDonald's and put it onto a kazayas with the bun, so you have a half a zayas of treifa meat with a piece of bread. So you would never say that if someone eats that is over the lav, because he's only eating a half a kazayas of meat. The bread is fine, is kosher. So that in kol Torah kula, we never say that a heter is mitzaref le'isser, that you combine the heter with the isser. In other words, even though you're eating a kazayas, but if you look at the treifa food that you're eating, it's only a half a zayas, you're certainly not over a lav. What we saw yesterday, the big chiddush of the Mishnah, I hope that made it through, that chametz, if it's a mixture of chametz, of heter and isser, let's say you have a half a zayas of matzah and a half a zayas of chametz, and you join them together and you eat it, a person is over a lav, because the heter combines with the isser. That only appears in just 2 or 3 places in kol Torah kula where we say the heter is mitzaref le'isser. Normally, we say in order to be over the lav, you need to have a full zayas. But here, by Pesach, by chametz, we say the heter is mitzaref le'isser. So here we see another thing. Amar Rabba Bo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba Bo said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Kol isurin shebetorah, any isser in the Torah, let's say not eating kosher meat, right? Treifa meat. Ein heter mitzaref le'isser. The heter, that even though if it's a separate entity, is not mitzaref le'isser, doesn't combine with the isser to become a kazayas, chutz, except mi'isurei nazir, an isser of a nazir. That means if a nazir, is not allowed to eat a grape, if he takes a grape, if the nazir takes a grape with a piece of bread, he's chayiv, because the Torah says mishras. Mishras means that it's soaked. Let me just get this up excuse me for a second. Technical. Here we go. Okay, I don't have it here. Took the wrong daf. Okay, the mishras means that the Torah tells you that if you take a piece of that, mishras means chol mishras anovim lo yishta, that anything soaked in wine is not allowed. A nazir is not allowed to eat. So it comes to teach you that a nazir eating a little piece of bread soaked a little bit with wine doesn't have a kazayas of wine. He just dips it into the wine and eats it. He's chayiv, right? Just from that alone. Even though if you look at the wine content of what he's eating, the wine content, he's not eating a kazayas. By naziris, heter is mitzaref le'isser. U'ze'ira omer. Ze'iri said, af se'or bal taktiru. Even se'or, you're not allowed to have. There's a halacha in Chumash that you're not allowed to bring chametz onto the mizbeach, and we learned before that even if someone takes a half a kazayas of matzah and a half a kazayas of chametz and puts it onto the mizbeach, that's also chayiv, because we learned yesterday from the word kol. We learned from kol that from the kol right over here, kol. From this kol, the Rabbi Lezer holds that even if you have a half a zayis of matzah and half a zayis of chametz and you put it onto the mizbeach, you're chayiv. Even though the Torah says you're not allowed to bring any chametz onto the mizbeach, Rabbi Lezer holds even a half a zayis with a half a thing. Come on, Rabbi Lezer, the Darish kol. He darshans kol to include that.
Bernard, did you skip it, Daf?
Mem Gimel, no, we're up to Mem Daled.
You said 45, and it looks like you were on the top of
44.
You're on the top of 44 now?
I'm on 44. Here. I'm a 40. I'm on 43B. I'm sorry.
Oh, you said 40.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
A lot of things are going haywire here.
Okay.
You with me? 43B. Let's just get it straight. Hold on a second. Here we go. I'm getting on to 43. Okay, here we go. I just did this. This is what I'm up to. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, hold on. Let me get my draw. Rabbi Boaz said that any Isser in the Torah, heter is not mitzdarf Isser except the Isser of Nazir. By Isser of Nazir, you say the heter combines with the Isser to make a kazayas. Zeiri added, even the Isser of throwing chametz on the Mizbeach, half a zayas of matzah and half a zayas of chametz, if you throw it onto the Mizbeach, you're chayev. So the Gemara says, if you're going with the opinion of Rabbi Lezer, say also, there's another thing. Le'inyan, now we go to Mendalet Amar Aleph. Le'inyan chametz b'Pesach. Also say that if someone eats a half a kazayas of matzah and a half a zayas of chametz in one eating, right? The cheter is mitzdaref the iser. So the Gemara says, ein hachinami. That's true too. Rabbi Lezer is the chiddush that if heter is mitzdaref the iser, even by chametz and Pesach, ulapuke medabai. The reason why he teaches you the halacha only, why did Ziri only tell you that it applies also by being makter onto the Mizbeach? Because lapuke medabaya, because he wanted to exclude that you should not learn like Abaya. Because Abaya said, the Omar Abaya said, Yesh haktora lepoches mikazayas. There is an isser to throw even a half a zayas onto the Mizbeach. It has nothing to do with, this has nothing to do with chametz, with throwing chametz on a whole heter combining with isser, and you're throwing a zayas onto the Mizbeach. Even a half a zayas on the Mizbeach is already usher. Kamash Malam, that's why Zeiri came to teach you the Haktorah lav bipochas mikazayas. That even Haktorah, to be maktor on the Mizbeach, if you throw a half a zayas of chametz on the Mizbeach, you don't get an isser. The only reason why you get an isser is if you combine it with even heter together with the isser and you have a zayas, that's when you're over on the Mizbeach. That's when you get the isser. So we were holding right now, if you ask me where we're holding, is that we see three very important Isurim in the Torah that's very different than every Isur in the Kol HaTorah Kula. Every Isur in Kol HaTorah Kula, the only way I'm chayiv is if I eat a whole kazayas. If you want to eat pork, it has to be a kazayas. But the Isur of Nazir, Chometz b'Pesach, and being makter chometz on the Mizbeach, those three Isurim is that there's a possibility exists that even if you have a half a zayas of Isur and half a zayas of Heter, they combine to become one entity of Isser, and therefore Yechayev in those three instances. So a Nazir eating a piece of bread soaked with a little bit of wine, if he's eating a kazayas of bread, even though the wine is the problem, the wine with the bread become one piece of Isser, and he's over on that. And same thing with Chametz Pesach and being makter on the Mizbeach. The Gemara continues. Yosef Ravdimi v'kamala hashmaitza. Ravdimi said, repeated the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan with the addition of what Zeiri said, and what we're trying to say that it's by Chametz Pesach. So only of those three things. Amalei Abai Ravdimi. So Rabbi said in the to Ravdimi, the Chol Isur Shabbatayra Ein Heter Mitzaref L'Isur. This concept of heter combining with the Isser does not apply in Kol HaTorah Kula. That's not true. I'll prove it to you that it does. But Tanan, we learned in a Mishnah. And this Mishnah is in Meseches Tvul Yom. HaMikvah shel Truma, v'hashum v'hashemen shel Chulin, b'noga Tvul Yom b'miktzason, pasal es Kulam. Take a look at the picture here. Here's the picture. Right over here. We have a picture over here of porridge. Of, let's say that this porridge is red, it's truma. But the guy put in pieces of spices, let's say radishes or onions, and a tvul yom is a sheni by now, you know that. So he touched that piece of that mixture, the whole thing becomes puzzle, the whole thing becomes usser, right? The whole thing becomes usser because the whole thing has a din of truma in it. If the whole porridge, so to speak, was made of chulin, and there's the pieces, the spices were of truma, if he touches it, only that place where he touched, you just scoop it out. That place that he touched is tameh, and the rest is tahar, because the rest has a din like chulin. And a sheni doesn't make by chulin, you don't make it a shlishi. So the tful yom that touches it only passes that area that he touched, but not anywhere else. So you can see right away, wait a second, how much over here, in this case over here, how much truma do you have over here? You have less than a kazayas of truma over here. You have just a bunch of little spices over here. And yet, you take the spices, so you don't say that the truma is bottle and that's it. You say the spices of truma combine with the chulin and they become one piece of truma. And that's why you passel that area. So we see, that's what the Gemara is going to try to say. We see that heter is mitzvah of the isser in other portions of the Torah. By truma, we're saying the chulin, the white part, combines with the red spices, and it becomes like a kazayis, and it becomes mekabel tuma, and it becomes puzzle. That's what the Gemara is going to say at this moment. The Gemara says, we learned hamikvah shel truma. You have porridge of truma. Imagine a red porridge of truma. It's thick, like jello. Bahashim, bahashem, and shalchulim. You put in a little bit of shum. Shum, I think, is radish, right? And
shum is I think shum is garlic.
Shum is garlic. Shum is garlic. Correct. Bahashem, yeah. And he put a little oil in it. Shalchulim. So presumably, there's much more truma than the garlic and the oil. Naga tvul yom, the tvul yom touched a little bit of the porridge. Pasal is cool, and the whole thing is also to eat because the whole thing has a din truma. But what happens if you have a mikvah shel chulin? If you have a porridge made of chulin, okay? So the whole thing was chulin, and you added v'hashum, v'hashem, and shel truma. You put in garlic and oil of truma, right? So that you put, well, how much garlic do you put into into a porridge? A little bit. V'noga tvul yom b'miktsasen, and the tvul yom touched a little part of that porridge. Loi pasal elamokoy magoy bovad. He passes that place that he touched because that place, we assume that there was a little garlic there. The garlic is not a kazayas, but if you add the chulin part, that chulin together with the garlic becomes one piece of truma, and therefore when the tful yom touches it, that area has a din of truma. So scoop it out, and the rest is permitted. So v'havinim ba, and so we ask the question, makoy magoy abai psula. Why is that area puzzle? Habatle luhu tavlin b'roiv. The tavlin, the spices, should be nullified because there's mostly chulin in that. So why just if you have a little piece of garlic, it's not bottle? So the Amar Rabba Bar Elchana, matam. What's the reason why it doesn't get bottle b'roiv? Because hoil, since v'zor loik aleim bekazayis. If a zor would eat that porridge, he would get, if he takes a scoop out of it, he would get a malchus. You see, in this case, imagine a guy put in these red spices, the red garlic, for truma, and the rest is chulin. If a non-kohen would eat from this, even just a little kazayas, he would get malchus on it. Why? Because the way we're learning now, Rabba Babachana is saying, because that little piece of garlic combines with the heter of chulin and becomes one isser of truma. It becomes, even though it's smaller than a kazayas, but it combines with the chulin and becomes like a kazayas of truma. If that's the case, we see clearly that in other cases of the Torah, in other areas of the Torah, we do see that heter is mitzaref le'isser. So the Gemara says, hey chedami, what do you want to talk about? La mishum. The heter mitzaref le'isser. Heter combines with the isser. So I found you another place in the Torah where you do say heter is mitzaref combines with the isser. So the Gemara answers, lo, that's not the case over there. My kazayas, what does it mean? A kazayas That means that when you eat from that porridge, and that porridge that has a little bit of garlic of truma, it means you're eating the whole bowl of porridge. And when you're eating a whole bowl of porridge, you're going to eat a kazayas of truma in there, because you're going to eat a kazayas of truma in less than 3 minutes. Kedei achilas pras is less than 3 minutes, let's assume. So that's a shear of how much you have to eat in order to be mechayev in a certain amount of period of time. So basically, the reason why Rabbi Babachana said yechayev over here is because it's talking about if a guy would eat the whole bowl, and during that whole bowl, you have a kazayas of truma garlic in there, and you can eat that within 3 minutes, that's why yechayev. Therefore, that's why that piece has a din of truma, and therefore, when you touch it, that's why the whole thing becomes tameh, because there's actually a kazayas of garlic in this bowl over here, which can be eaten kedei achilas pras. So when you touch it, the whole thing has like a din of truma, because there's a kazayas of truma in there, and therefore you passel, there's a tuma on that area that you touch. So now the Gemara asks a question. The Gemara asks this question: if someone eats a kazayas in the period of 3 minutes as part of a mixture, is that asur midairaisa? In other words, the question that the Gemara is asking is, I know that if I eat a piece of treif meat by itself, a kazayas, I get a lav. What happens if that treif meat is mixed up in a mixture, right? And I eat that mixture, you really can't see the treif meat. It's somewhere in that mixture, but when I eat that mixture, I'm definitely eating a kazayas of isser within a certain period of time. If I eat that mixture, will I be oivim midaraisa? Maybe midaraisa, maybe the Torah only asked you if you eat the kazayas as is. You can see it on the table and you eat the kazayas. But if it's part of a mixture, and the only way to eat a kazayas is if you eat the whole mixture within 3 and 4 minutes, and then you have a kazayas of that isser in you, maybe that's not osum in a Torah. So the Gemara says amalei in. That is osum in a Torah. So not only eating a kazayas is osum in a Torah, but a kazayas that's part of a mixture that you can eat. When you eat the mixture within 3 minutes, you eat a kazayas of isser. That's also osum in a Torah. Ihachi, says the Gemara, if that's the case, amai pligi rabbanan le the Rabbi Lezer bekuta chabavli. Why? By that kuta chabavli, that's that cream cheese with a little bit of wheat in it that the Mishnah mentions, that according to the Rabbanan, one who eats it on Pesach is not over the Isra of eating chametz. But presumably, let's assume that there's a kazayas of wheat in that mixture, and if one eats it in a certain period of time, he should be chayiv of not eating chametz. So why do Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Eliezer? It seems that it's a no-brainer. Elamai, what's the reason? Mishum hetem mitzdarf le'isser. So you want to say that the reason why the Rabbanan disagree, it's not because there's a kazayas of pras in there. Soif, amai pleading alei the Rabbi Lezer by kuta chabavli. Why would the Rabbanim argue by kuta chabavli, even if you want to say that the reason is because of hetem mitzdarf le'isser? At the end of the day, why should the Rabbanim disagree with that concept? Amalei elo, the reason is hanach lekuta chabavli the leispe kazayis bechdei al kilas pras. There's really no way, if you're going to put this kuta chabavli in your mouth and start eating it, which is basically used as a spread on bread, and you start eating it, within 3 minutes, you're never going to eat a kazayas chametz. If you're going to eat a lot at one time, the kasarech v'achal, that has a very sharp taste, it can even hurt you if you eat so much of it in one shot. So if you eat it that way, that's not called eating, and therefore what you do is not considered eating, and therefore you wouldn't get an isser. If you're going to just dip your bread in it and then eat it, So then it'll take you longer than 3 minutes to get a kazayas. Less be kazayas b'chidei achilas pras. You do not have a kazayas in the eating of a pras. So basically, here's the steps. The Rabbanan hold that when something has a kazayas of bread in it, but you can't eat it within 3 minutes, so the Rabbanan hold this mixture is permitted to eat on Pesach. It's not an Issa d'Oraisa, because you're eating less than a kazayas, and we do not say heter mitzdaraf li-Isser, that you combine the heter with the Isser. Rabbi Eliezer says, yes, you do say heter mitzdaraf li-Isser, and that is the machloikis between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. If you say heter mitzdaraf li-Isser, but if you would be able to eat theoretically a mixture of food, and within 3 minutes you're going to eat a kazayas of chometz, even the Rabbanan would agree that you're chayiv, because the fact that it's a mixture, but at the end of the day you're eating a kazayas of chometz within that mixture, and you ate it within 3 minutes, you're chayiv. What we're talking about over here, that it takes you longer than 3 minutes to eat a kazayas, so you're eating basically less than a kazayas. So Rabbanan say that's no Isser, that you didn't over an Isser Daraisa. Rabbi Lezer says heter's mitzdarf li-Isser by chometz. Esavei. The Gemara asks another question. The Mishnah says shtei kederis acha shel chulin v'acha shel tuma. Imagine 2 pots full of food. One has chulin and one has truma. V'lifneihem, and in front of them you have shtei medoiches, 2 mortar and pestles, grinding spices. Acha shel chulin v'acha shel truma. One of these grinders, mortar and pestle, has chulin in it, and one has truma in it. V'nafdu elu l'soich elu, and they fell into what was in the grinding, what was in the spice receptacles, fell into the pots. So one could say that the truma spices fell into the chulin pot, and the chulin spices fell into the truma pot, and then you got a mixture that must be eaten only by kohen. So the Mishnah says mutarim, that it's mutter. Shani oime, because I say the spices of truma l'sech truma nafla. The spices of truma fell into the truma. The chulin l'sech chulin nafla, and the spices of chulin fell into the chulin. Now, we're presuming that you have a kazayas of spices falling into this pot. So if there's a possibility that the truma spices fell into the chulin pot, why should I say it's mutter? That if as long as a kazayas falls into a mixture, that's daraisa, and that's also to eat. Why do you assume automatically that the truma fell into the truma pot and the chulin fell into the chulin? It's going to be a real suffix daraisa of a real possibility that chulin could fall into the truma part. And then rendering it could be a real possibility that the truma spices falling into the chulin pot, rendering the chulin pot totally usher. So it must be the reason why we assume leheter, we say that the chulin fell into chulin, truma fell into truma, is because kazayis b'chidei achilas pras is not doraisa. So the Gemara says no. Really, kazayis b'chidei achilas pras is doraisa. Amalei hanach letrumas tavlim d'rabbanan. Leave go of trumas tavlim. Spices, truma of spices, which you're assuming that the spices are truma, it's only midrabanan anyway. So once you're dealing with drabbanans, you can always say lekuladik, that the spices of truma fell into the truma pot and the spices of chulin fell into the chulin pot, because the whole thing is midrabanan. Esvei, one more challenge of this idea of kazayis b'chidei achilas pras is a doraisa. One more challenge. It says in the Mishnah, it says in the Brisa, shtei kupais. You have two kupais or boxes. Acha shel chulin, v'acha shel truma. One is chulin wheat, and here's the key word: wheat. V'acha shel truma, and one is truma wheat. Lifneim beisoim, and you have another 2 pounds, so to speak, of wheat. Acha shel chulin, v'acha shel truma. One of chulin and one of truma. And you don't know v'naflu elu l'seichelu, and these pound of food fell into the boxes, and you don't know which one fell into which. We say mutarim because you say chulin l'say chulin naflu, truma l'say truma naflu, that the chulin fell into the chulin, the truma fell into truma. So the Gemara asks the same question: the amrit kazayis b'chidei achilas pras doiraisa. If you want to say that when a kazayis of iser falls into a mixture, the whole thing becomes aser doiraisa. So then also over here you have wheat falling into potentially truma wheat falling into a box of chulin wheat, and there's a suffix doiraisa over here. So why do you go lenient? Why should I go lenient over here? This whole thing becomes a suffix doiraisa. Amalei, so he answered back to him, Hanach l'truma b'zmanazeh d'rabanan. Truma b'zmanazeh is d'rabanan, and that's why I go lenient in that cases. Even though we're dealing with wheat, but truma in our time is considered d'rabanan. That's why you go lenient. So what did we accomplish with this whole Amid? This whole Amid just said one thing, that Rabbi Eliezer and the name and Rabbi Yochanan said that heter is mitzdaref le'iser by Nazir, by Chometz and Pesach according to Rabbi Eliezer, and by the Seor on the Mizbeach. And how did Rabbi Yochanan know that heter combines with iser by Nazir? Because he used, if the Torah tells you v'chol mishras anovin, when you dip your bread into the wine, it's also to eat that piece of bread. That's what he knows. That's how Rabbi Yochanan knew that. So the Gemara questions that. V'hai mishras lahachi yudi asa. How could you use mishras to teach you that heter is mitzdaref le'iser by nazir? We needed to teach you something else. Not that hester is mitzdaref le'iser. Again, heter mitzdaref le'iser means if you have a half a zayas of iser and half a zayas of heter, they become like one zayas of iser. That only works, let's say the bread with the piece of grate upon it, that becomes aser for a nazir to eat. That's what you learn from Mishras. I needed to teach you something else. I needed to teach you something, a new concept, which is a very chiddush concept in all of Torah Kula. Mishras, to teach you litain tam ki ikar, that the tam, the taste of something is like the main thing. To teach you shimshara novim b'mayim. Let's say I soak grapes into water. Yesh behem tam yain, and the grapes and the water after removing the grapes has the taste of wine. Chayev. This is called tam ki ikar. It's the most fundamental concept in Hilchas Kashrus, where the taste of something, long after you remove the treifa food, still remains in the wall. For example, let's say by a treifa oven, you cooked the guy cooked a treifa piece of meat in there in a hotel or something like that. So no matter how much you clean the oven, that oven is usher because the taste of the treifa food goes into the walls of the oven, and long after you remove the food, the taste is in the walls, and that will go into the food. And that is, where do you see that concept of tam is like the main thing? We see it from Nazir. The Torah tells you, don't drink the water that you soaked grapes in it. In other words, a Nazir who's not allowed to eat grapes, not only is not allowed to eat the grapes, the Torah is telling you that if you took grapes, you put it into water, and then you remove the grapes, the Nazir is not allowed to even drink that because the taste of grapes is in that drink. Mikan, and from the halacha of Nazir, we learn atadon l'chol Torah kula. In every isser in the Torah, tam is ke'isser. And let's say like this, we darshan like this. Man Nazir is a very light isser. She'ein isuri isur olam. A Nazir, the isser of not eating grapes doesn't last forever. Usually a Naziris is only for 30 days. Ve'ein isuri isur anah. And a Nazir is not asur b'hanah to benefit from grapes. He's permitted to benefit from grapes. Yesh heitel isuri. And there's a possibility that if he goes to a chacham, he can undo his whole Naziris. So it's not such a big isser. But there, the Torah teaches you, asur by tam ki ikar. The tam is like the ikar, and therefore it teaches you that concept of tam ki ikar. So kalayim, for example, another isser of the Torah of kalayim. Let's say you have a grape that is kalayim. How is a grape kalayim? This grape came from a mixture of wheat, barley, and grapes. You planted it all together, and you have this little grape that has the inside of it is a little bit of a wheat and a barley. That's kalayim. That Isser is like the worst Isser in the Torah. She Isuri Isser Oilam. That Isser on that grape is forever. It's Klayim. The Isuri Isser Anah. And you're not allowed to benefit from Klaya Kerem. You're not allowed to benefit from it. You have to burn it. There's no way that it'll ever become mutter. Certainly, that the halacha would be the tam is ikar. So basically, Naziris teaches you a halacha din that applies in every ism in the Torah. What's that din? Tam ikar, and that applies in hilchas kashrus and hilchas everything. Whenever there's an isser tam inside the walls, that applies by Pesach also. Chametz, the reason why I have to kasher my whole kitchen is because the taste of the chametz goes into the microscopic wall of my my countertop, so to speak, and therefore that needs to, or my sink, it needs to be kashered, and therefore where do you know that concept of tam ke'ifker? That you learn from Nazir. So what Gemara ends the question over here. So if I need Mishras to teach you Tam Ke'ikr, where will I know the other concept that Rabbi Yochanan taught, that Heter is Mitzdaraf Le'isr? So the Gemara says, you also learn that by Orla, which is also more Chomerdik by Stein. Okay, basically, whatever you learn by Nazir applies not only by Kalayim, but Hilchas Orla, and it applies by Hilchas Kashrus. So answers the Gemara, Hamani, where did Hamani, that learned Tam Ke'ikir from the word Mishras is Rabbanan he. Rabbi Yochanan, the Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yochanan learned like Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara is going to ask, where does Rabbi Akiva know Tam Ke'ikir if he's using Mishras for Hetem et Staraf Le'isra? But the Gemara first wants to find, where do you see Rabbi Akiva learns from the word Mishras that Heter is Mitzdaraf Le'isra? The Gemara says, hey, Rabbi Akiva, what Rabbi Akiva are we talking about? Rabbi Akiva Damas Nisa, that there's a Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah on Nazir. Now we learned in the Mishnah in Nazir, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Nazir Sheshara Pita Bayayim, another Nazir that soaked his bread in wine. And there's, if you take the bread together with the wine, you have a kazayis, chayev. That's chayev. So now we see Rabbi Akiva is almost exactly of what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. So Rabbi Yochanan says, don't ask a question on me. I hold like Rabbi Akiva that the word mishras teaches you that heter is mitzdarf le'isr. The bread soaked in wine, if you have a kazayis, that becomes aser. So the Gemara says, how do you know that Rabbi Akiva is talking about a case with when you combine the bread and the wine, you have a kazayis? Maybe Rabbi Akiva is talking about you soaked it in so much wine that you have a kazayas of wine alone in that bread. Maybe you have so much wine from the wine itself, you have a kazayas of wine in that bread. If there was a kazayas of wine in there, what would be the chiddush if you just have a piece of bread soaked in a lot of wine, and because there's a kazayas of wine inside of that, what would be the chiddush? I will tell you there's a big chiddush. Even though it's not, you can't see the wine, or it's somewhere in the holes of the bread, you'd still be chayiv. So that's the chiddush of Rabbi Akiva. But really, you're eating a kazayis of wine, and that's why it's awesome. But Rabbi Yochanan is telling you something even more so, that even if you have a half a kazayis of wine and a half a kazayis of bread, they combine. Where do you see Rabbi Akiva holding that opinion? So the Gemara says he does, because we have a Rabbi Akiva in the Brisa. Rabbi Akiva says in the Brisa, the Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Akiva oimer, Nazir sheshara pita b'yayin, a Nazir that soaked his bread in wine, ba'ocha kazayis, and he ate a kazayis. And how do you get a kazayis? We pass u'miyayin, from the bread and the wine, chayev, yechayev. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva is exactly what Rabbi Yochanan is saying, that you can eat a half a kazayis of bread and a half a kazayis of wine in one sitting. A Nazir who eats that is chayev, because you learn from Mishras. The word Mishras by Nazir teaches you heter mitzdaraf le'isr. So now the Gemara asks the famous question: if you learn from Mishras heter mitzdaraf le'isr, but there's another concept we need to know. Where do you know the concept of tam ke'ikar? If you're using Mishras for somewhere else to teach you heter mitzdaraf le'isr, where do you know the concept of tam ke'ikar? So that's the Gemara's question. Rabbi Kiva, tam ki'ika menole. How do you know tam is ki'ika? How do you know that? So then he says, Yalef le basar b'chalav. You learn it up from meat cooked in milk. In other words, if you have a piece of meat that's cooked in milk, and you can see the milk, the meat, the milk got so absorbed by the meat, right? And when you eat the meat, all you're tasting the milk inside of it. The Torah says that's usher. So we see a concept of tam ki'ikar from the isser basar b'chalav. Lav tam ba'almi. By basar b'chalav, all you're getting is the taste of the milk, the usher, and it's usher. Hachanami loishna, there's no different. Any of the other isser, there's no different than basar b'chalav. So the Gemara says, Rabbanan, according to Rabbanan, why did they learn tam ki'ikar from basar b'chalav? The basar b'chalav loy gamrinim. You don't learn basar b'chalav to every other isser in the Torah. The chidushu. Basar b'chalav is such a unique isser in the Torah that just any chiddush that you find by basar b'chalav does not apply anywhere else. Why? What's so special about basar b'chalav? So my chiddush, what's so special about basar b'chalav? Because basar b'chalav is a unique isser. Each part is not usser by itself. The meat is permitted by itself. The milk is permitted by itself. It's just a combination of the two that makes it usser. But when you combine them, that's usser. That's why basar b'chalav is such a unique chiddush and so different than any other isser in the Torah. Wait a second, says the Gemara. Hold it. I have another isser in the Torah very similar. Kilayim. Kilayim nami, haylu chudei v'haylu chudei. Let's say you have wool and linen. Each one you're permitted to wear, shari, uvahade yadodi, usser. But when you combine them together, it's usser. So that's not unique by basar b'chalav. Ella, says the Gemara, what makes basar b'chalav unique, the Torah le'kuli yom b'chalva. The Torah says if you drop a piece of meat and you soak it, let's say 10 hours in milk, and you didn't cook it, shari, it's permitted. Bashule be'shule, but if you cook it, it becomes usser. So therefore, we see from there that if you're over not just on eating it, Rashi points out, just by cooking itself, you get an isser, and then when you eat it, it becomes usser. So that is a big chiddush that you don't find anywhere else in the Torah. That you can keep them together all day, no isser. Once you heat them up, that's when it becomes an isser. So that makes basar b'chalav very unique than kol Torah kula. So therefore, I cannot learn the chiddush that you find tam ke'ika by basar b'chalav to any other isser in the Torah. So that's why the Rabbanan said, I need Mishras to teach you that. Rabbi Akiva. Nami basar b'chalav v'ad chiddushu. Basar b'chalav is for sure a chiddush. So where is Rabbi Akiva? Where's Rabbi Akiva going to know that tam ke'ikar? You can't learn it from basar b'chalav because basar b'chalav is unique. Ella, says the Gemara, Yalef migu'ule goyim. He learns it from that the Torah required you to kasher kalim, the kalim that they got during the war. The Chumash says that when the Jews conquered Midian, Hashem said, if you want to use those kalim, you have to kasher it. And the kashering means to get out the taste of non-kosher food that was in the walls of those pots and food vessels that we captured from the Goyim. That's the Chumash saying that. Gule Goyim, when the purging of the food that was from the Goyim, lav tama ba'almehi. You're only just taking out the taste in the walls of the kalim. Ba'aser, and it's aser. Hachaname, also over here, loishna, there's no different. Every place in all of Torah Kula, we also apply this concept of tam ke'ikar. Then the Gemara says, wait a second, that's an open pasuk, that's tam ke'ikar. Why didn't Rabbanan learn that from there? Rabbanan guli goyim nami chidushu. That was a special case by Midian, that it was a special chidushu. Because when the Jews brought back those vessels from that war, it was 24 hours later. And it would give, if you would cook it up, it would give a putrid taste into the food. And we have a klal, mutter, the gamrina mevela, that any time a food is not edible to eat, or it would give a bad taste, we learn from nevela that you're not over. And here, the Torah still required you to kasher it, even though the Torah still required you to kasher it, even though it would give a bad taste if you cook kosher food in there. So that was a chiddush. V'hacha aser. And over here, the Torah says it was aser. So therefore, you don't learn from Geulei Goyim to teach you everywhere else in the Torah, Kam Ki Isser. It was only a unique situation over there in Midian that Hashem required you to kasher the vessels over there. So the Rabbi Kiva, no, he holds that when the Torah required you to kasher the kalim over there, Torah was requiring you to kasher kalim that were only 1 day old. The Torah only answered only a pot that was 1 day old. The case of the Torah that required you to kasher the kalim was only a case where it was less than a day old. That means the goy that they captured from Midian still used the pot within that 24-hour period. So it was not giving off a bad taste. And that's why the Torah required you to kasher it. So the bottom line is that Rabbi Kiva says that Geulei Goyim, the Chumash story about Midian, is a good source to learn to kol Torah kula that tam is ki'ikar. Rabbanan say that even though kedera bas yomen nami lo efshar lo pogma purta, if the kedera was even a couple of hours old, still it gives off a bad taste into new food that you cook there. So, and the Torah, so therefore, according to Rabbanan, it's still a chiddush by Geulei Goyim that the Torah said you have to kasher a kalim. That could only apply by Geulei Goyim, by the case of Midian, but you cannot learn it for everywhere else in the Torah. But Rabbi Akiva said, as long the Torah was talking about a case that the pots were not a day old, and still the Torah required you to kasher it, to teach you. From that is the source that Tam Ki'ikar applies in every other area of the Torah. Tam Ki'ikar. And therefore, Rabbi Kiva has availability to use the word Mishras to teach you Heter Mitzdaraf Le'Isser by Nazir. So we learned two important things in this daf. One, the concept of Heter Mitzdaraf Le'Isser, and the concept of Tam Ki'ikar. This is a very fundamental Gemara in dealing with Hechsher and Kashering and Yeridea. Very fundamental in becoming a Rav and going into Kashrus.
You know, my Gemara says Nachrim, not Goyim.
Oh, no, well, that's interesting. The Steinsaltz goes back to the original Gemara. So I using Steinsaltz's version. And whenever something was censored, they put in the Gemara what it was before it was censored. So I don't know why. Nachrim means stranger, but Goyim means Gentile. That's why they put it there.
So which is the original?
Goyim.
Goyim.
Yeah.
Yeah. So mine says Nachrim everywhere, even in the Rashi it says Nachrim.
Right. They censored that. But this is a fundamental Gemara. Over here of Tam Ki'ikar, and it's the whole basis why you have to kasher everything, your kalim for Pesach. You have to kasher the countertops and the sinks and the pots. Even though you could scrub it out and you can wash it with soap and water and send it through the dishwasher 10 times, it's not going to get the taste that's somehow stuck in the walls of the pot, of the chometz tika pot. So how do you know that concept of Tam Ki'ikar, that I have to kasher this kalim? How do you know that? According to Rabbi Akiva, you know it from the Torah talks about kashering kalim, and according to the Rabbanan, you learn it from Mishras, that Tam Ki'ikar. It's something to do with it's a chiddush of the Torah, because I would think that if you wash it out, what taste is going in there? But once the taste is in the wall, it's going to go into the next cooked food. And therefore, it needs kashering.
Oh yeah,
Like
thank you.
like a good egg omelet pan. It always has that same taste.
Yes, that's probably what it is. Right.
That's what it is.
And an omelet pan probably would need libun. The most severest form of kashering is actually taking the blowtorch on it or something.
Right.
Like if you want to kasher your barbecue grill.
Mm-hmm.
So that needs it always will have that taste. So you have to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
Yes.
Okay. Okay.